Okay, so remember that they're changing my voice. This is part 2. We're at point number 6. So let us take a white example, bearing in mind that all white examples in popular culture come up short of a morally precise point of reference. It's very difficult to point to any example from any race in popular culture that's a morally precise point of reference. It basically doesn't exist. I am the true example. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Not any celebrity you've ever heard of. Not what comes to mind before you see my videos when you think of Jesus, because you don't understand that they're superimposing their fairy kind of system on the Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order and the top martial artist, Son of God. And when you hear that phrase, right, the top martial artist, Son of God, is a Royal African, Black African, mulatto African person, you know that I'm telling the truth because of the points of references you do have. And then it hits you and you think, why didn't they give this person his credit the first time? And things start being more clear. And that's why it's more than fair for me to emphasize whatever racial components are involved, because it helps you see it for what it truly is. It helps you see me for what I truly am. Propaganda dominates whatever cultures they dominate will say. And it doesn't dominate my culture. Also, the rules on YouTube are not fair, and the people who make them try to create the situation where we are confused about things, including who to date. So I put it that way. This is true regardless of whether or not the government is ultimately making the rules. So first, let us take the typical and common type of person in a gay parade. No offense to the LGBT community, but the purpose of this example is to help people understand characteristics. And since this is a very white and whitewashed society, I'm going to first use the example of white people. Bear with me. You'll see that it's more than fair. Now let's compare that, right, the typical common type of person from a gay parade, to the most polite white person we can think of in a suit, whether they are a privileged hypocrite or not. What is the logical assumption here? If they have the same amount of money and guilt in regards to complicity with an evil system, which type has superior characteristics? Do we not see churches and other groups making arguments subtly and otherwise in regards to who goes beyond who? Is it not racist as hell to sabotage me while they pretend that a white person in a suit is ideal? Why did we have to put it in terms of a white comparison in the first place? Okay, should we respect any groups that uphold a construct that makes it so we have to do that, right? Put it in terms of white people. When Martin Luther King Jr. is the celebrity in America that goes beyond all the other celebrities. This has everything to do with why not to follow the governing class. Now let's think about this here. In America, most people are taught, they're conditioned by lots of groups working together in concert, right? They're colluding for this purpose, for the purpose of confusing you about human worth. There is not a moral order in people's minds. There's more or less a racial order. Quite often people default with their race, but overall, how every group is being conditioned, they're conditioned to care about black people the least. Then after that, immigrants. It has to do with the difference between saying Black Lives Matter in a way that's obnoxious and having certain whites and Jews and Hispanic people go on TV and make their case as to why immigrants have a right to achieve the dream and say they're hardworking while trying to convince you that black people aren't hardworking. Okay, so you're being taught to think of whites and Jews and LGBT people in a way that makes them subtly or superior in your mind. It's an unconscious bias. It's a subconscious process, what have you. While you're being taught to not respect black people when Jesus is black, so when he comes around, you don't believe him. Just like when it comes to, internet scams, Nigerians are seen as the main internet scam types, the main type of people are scamming people. It's more complicated than that. Quite often they're proxies for white Jews and LGBT people and CIA and what have you. Various groups like that certainly must be involved, and there's evidence that proves at times that some have been caught being involved. Now let's look at it for what it is. This has everything to do with not following the governing class, including their racial thinking. My father is from Nigeria. He's a humanitarian and a brain surgeon that society has scammed into next week and oppressed and used the color of law and psyops to prevent him from really enjoying the fruits of his labor, especially the fruit of his womb, his son, who is Jesus. That's very low for that society to do that. Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed for much less than that. And one who slackens his work is brother to one who destroys. And whoever doesn't gather with me scatters. And you got people sticking up their nose at me. You got women shunning me because I'm targeted and because I'm poor. And I'm targeted and I'm poor because I'm righteous, because I'm the Son of God. Your scales have failed you miserably. Your martial arts have failed you because they failed to teach your communities to not shun the most righteous person that ever lived, when martial arts are about building character. And the Kuro Obi black belt points to me. Okay, so another example of WHYTE cultural failure. And what I mean by that, again, is it's referring to the fact that no known white culture is morally precise and has ever been morally precise, and that white people collectively, except for a small group of people who were approaching right, okay, relatively small group of people, and my mom is an individual. So there's a difference between saying white, and when I was saying white historically, I meant the same thing, right? And saying WHYTE, which is emphasizing that so people can accuse me of racism. Okay, so part of WHYTE culture with that definition is that they like to mock people who are saying something important if it doesn't uphold the white social orders and white cultural system, which I find very repugnant. And keep in mind, I'm part white and part Jewish, but my black genes are very dominant. And I emphasize that because they're fuming me and poisoning me to cover that up. And they're mocking my divine Royal African martial art line. So point number 7. Clearly a shorter life where one lives in morally precise principle in reality is greater than either of those two WHYTE examples. How much more when they are trying to enslave you? How much more when their system is trying to mentally enslave you? And otherwise, at least in a sense. Point number 8, consider these characteristics: purposeless, senseless, selfish, silly, goofy, reckless, careless, carefree, sloppy, guilty, self-absorbed, in denial, deluded, inconsiderate, shallow, basic, common, weak-willed, sissy, pansy, feeble-minded, arrogant, self-entitled, pretentious, being a smartass, sarcastic, malicious, imposing, rude, dishonest, pointless, stupid, etc. Go back and see that part again is needed, pause is needed, and think about it. Now, which example is more like the characters Dumb and Dumber in the movie? Bearing in mind that not every LGBT person is like the typical person in a gay parade, just like everyone who likes rock isn't like the typical metalhead or rocker at a rock concert. So which of those two examples is more like the characters Dumb and Dumber in the movie Dumb and Dumber? Okay, the typical person at a gay parade, or the typical polite white person in a suit, whether they're a privileged hypocrite or not. We'll say historically, we'll say in the 90s, for example, because that's really what I'm pointing to, not these guys these days who have blurred the line more with a gays at a gay parade, whether they're gay or not. Okay. Point number 9. Should one need to see the brain scans of Dumb and Dumber to understand why I'm right? Do they need them to have half a brain, so to speak, or to show you half a brain on a brain scan or something? Okay. And keep in mind, having got there without being sabotaged for righteousness until they have cognitive impairment, mind you. Okay. Living those kind of lives isn't wise. They don't allow for one to live twice as long or even 10 times as long and to turn around as an old geezer and to honestly say that their choices were greater than the righteous person who accepted sabotage and the joy of doing what is right through persecution. And that is very important for you to understand that. When you follow the path of Dumb and Dumber in any variation, when you follow a path of mere conformity, it doesn't allow you to even live to be 1,000 and to turn around and say that your life was better than the short life of a righteous person who felt the joy of knowing that they're doing what's right and that time is passing by in a way that's in their favor and they're on their way to meet their Maker with honor and dignity and righteousness and justice and wisdom and all the martial art principles in their true form intact, monotheistic in true form. Okay. Point number 10. Now let us look back at the last 30 years and ask ourselves, can an immoral person 30 years ago say that his choice to be immoral was superior to my lifelong decision to be morally precise as I worked my way toward moral precision more and more? Whether they became, whether the person who didn't do what I did, which is everybody else, became another common, lame, cheesy, and boring rich person that thinks they're smart, or they were just a failure who isn't rich. Okay, so whether they failed as a rich, lame, and cheesy, boring rich person that's a dime a dozen who thinks they're important or not. Can they say that? So in other words, can George Bush, say my flesh died today at 43, just short of 44, can George Bush say, hey, my life was better? No. Because, I'm assuming he's, somewhere around 80-something, so about twice as long, right? Say he died at 86. Can he say that his life was better? No. So when we look back at it and we test the argument, we see that it's sound. I'm the top martial artist ever possible. And when anyone else follows my path, a short righteous life on my path, it's the only way to have a righteous life. A path of obeying God through me is far greater than a long conformist life, even if you're the richest person, if you can paint well, or you're a great scientist or whatever. That's peanuts compared to being righteous. And one must be in the divine order to be righteous. Okay. If there's any confusion there, and you have any questions, put in the comments. Point number 11. Name one rich person that you think can argue that I'm wrong. Can argue it successfully. They would just look so stupid. They don't want to go point by point about that. They don't. Point number 12. So with these very sound facts in mind, one must know that the empirical evidence has made it clear, and that saying you do not know scientifically and for sure that something is true does not change the facts. But for good measure, let us make one more example that makes it clear. If a wise ass was arguing with a serious military commander, and that wise ass said that the plan that the whole army should just run up on the enemy lines with no bullets and yell bang while getting decimated was magically a superior tactic because the commander does not know for sure that a more logical tactic, more specifically, the more logical conclusion in regards to a more logical tactic is the wise decision. When all is said and done, when he actually does, when you think about it, now how does he know? Well, because you have to have a sound plan as a military commander, as a king, as a leader. As the King of Kings, you have to have a sound plan. You can't just say, hey, let's do some random stupid stuff that's not the logical assumption in regards to what's wise, and say, well, why not? Because we don't know either way what the result is going to be. And there are people that need to be told this. And all of you need to be told this because you're all doing something that is far dumber than that in that scenario. If you can separate that in that scenario from losing your soul. If you have any questions, put in the comments. I know it's a little bit complicated. There are few of me, and there are few of me when I wrote it down, and I couldn't review it because I can't look at screens too long. I type things up without looking at it, and I kind of correct it from there when I'm giving a speech, when I'm fumed, and so on and so forth. But my arguments are sound nonetheless. Would that crazy person not be a traitor to that group? Yeah, he would be a traitor, right? Why are you recommending some crazy stuff and saying, well, you don't know for sure that a logical plan is a good idea? That's not a good argument. And as such, people who deny that the most righteous person ever possible should be compensated with lots of money and be in charge, mind you, after years of persecution, those people are the enemies of the human race. First and foremost, they're the enemies of God. And they're the enemies of the most righteous people that ever lived. With me being at the pinnacle. With me being at the top of the list of most righteous people that ever lived. I know that there is a God, and in a video game or something where there magically isn't, which obviously there is, one must still know that to be an indecent dog of a society that persecutes the most righteous person ever possible and does not compensate him and leave him alone when he is 43 is a fate far worse than death for that society. Point number 14. Now think of a single attractive female trying to decide whether or not to date me. Should I need to spell it out for her in a way that is similar to me spelling out all these things? Or should she see that judging people by the content of their character in reality, and not white, Jewish, and LGBT supremacy, far transcends her feelings and what common idiots are telling her to do? So in other words, it is against divine law for a single and attractive female to reject me, or for any female in an invalid marriage to reject me.